Welcome to Nerdarchy. Dave here, for Nerds by Nerds, my esteemed colleague Ted.
How you doing?
And today we are going to be talking about and discussing Dungeons & Dragons monsters, the Orc.
So the Orc, we have the straight out of the 3.5 monster manual, the half CR monster that, rolls a crit and just cuts your PCs in half. And you want to talk about them, huh?
That's what I want to talk about today. Orcs, I've always been very fond of basically all the races that speak with more of a guttural language. Orcs, goblins, dwarves, the hard consonant races. I don't know why, I'm just drawn to them.
Because you like the Klingon, and that's where it's all coming from.
That could very well be, but before Klingons we had orcs and Tolkien. So there's tons of examples of orcs throughout fantasy literature.
Indeed.
The thing with the orc is, I think as game masters, as dungeon masters, we just get stuck in this thing where, they're these cookie cutter monsters that we don't really think about. We just throw them out there. They're appropriate CR for a low level campaign.
And you just leave it at that.
And we leave it at that. We don't breathe any life into them, no personality.
The small bruisers that you can toss out there in droves, and by the time, characters are hitting, 3rd through 5th level, the mage has got enough magic to just wipe them all out with one spell and call it done.
Pretty much.
So how do we, as you would say, breathe life? How do you, into them, how do you get more out of this, little monster of a creature?
Well, first of all, they're intelligent and they have their own culture and civilization.
Uh-huh.
So right there, that's the start. Then the other thing is, well, what is the orc about? What do they do? How they interact with your world?
And that's the real key is, the your world. I mean, we all have, the fondness for playing, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, all the other campaign settings that's out there, but how many...
There's no orcs in Dragonlance.
No, there's no orcs in Dragonlance? Yeah. That just shows how much of a Dragonlance fan I am. Sorry, guys. So in the other campaign settings that are out there, you've got orcs, but I mean, if you're playing a homebrew, you've got the ability to make them your own.
Well, that's true, but I would also challenge DMs to, even if you're playing in a set setting, to not prescribe to, okay, it's got to be right out of the monster manual. I can't change this because when we start running our own campaign, our own Forgotten Realms is actually a great example, because what we're talking about doing in our homebrew has been technically done to Forgotten Realms. Because if you look at Forgotten Realms, it's been done twice by the same author, in my opinion. He took standard monsters that were kind of, they're cool, but they're still just, out of the monster man. Yeah, right out of the monster man. And they made them their own. They built a culture, story, and civilization around them, and made them much cooler. R.A. Salvatore did that with the Drow first. With Dritz Stewart, and then exploring his backstory and where he came from. He really rewrote what Dark Elves and Drow are in Forgotten Realms, which is kind of creeped over to other parts, other campaign worlds as well.
Right.
And then he went and did it again with Dritz, of course, in another one of his series with Abdul Many Arrows, and I'm probably butchering his name.
King Abdul Many Arrows. He made the Orcish city that is basically within spitting distance of Mithril Hall.
And one of the openings in the books, King Many Arrows is abdicating over a wedding between an orc and a human. And like it kind of goes into this reflective scene about how they got there and how he never could have imagined this happening.
Right.
And here we go. We're gonna have half orc babies running around, not of rape. It seems like sacrilege, but. So again, it's a perfect example. Well, years and years ago, me and you and a few other people, we created our own world called Ulthganya, our own campaign. And we sectioned off different pieces of it. And, I got the dwarves and I got the orcs, because our orcs actually had their own kingdom, called Gronor. And they carved that kingdom out of the world that already existed. They essentially kind of defeated the dwarves to claim their own realm. And as time goes on, just like in the Dritz books, you can't have a civilization that's purely based on war.
Right.
Yeah, there's got to be other things. There has to be commerce. There has to be, well, for it to be a civilization,
right.
you have to be civil to some extent or another. So we had that come up, and matter of fact, one of my first 3.5 or 3.0 characters was a human of Orc descent from Grauner that was an escaped gladiator. So there's definitely things that you can do. In Ulfganir, our Orcs were master smiths, focusing on weapons and armor, and that was their major export. And it would rival the dwarves for competing for commerce and selling their wares. And that's one example just from our campaign.
So basically, if a DM's looking to say, how can I make my world, a little bit more special and memorable to their players, is you can say, okay, well, I'm going to make this Gronor or Many Arrow City or whatever they want to call it, and be able to say, okay, well, now we have an established Orc civilization that's been carved out of the world, and then make their story of how that actually happened. Did some Orc actually wind up negotiating some kind of trade? Was it done through threat? Was it done through war? How did they establish that?
So, and it's exactly that. So, there's a lot of things. If you want to make a campaign memorable to your players, take something mundane and make it special. And in D&D, there is nothing more mundane than the Orc. It's just that classical monster we throw at the PCs. But when you start giving them personalities as individuals and as a society, it really will change how your players view your game, your world. It makes it a lot more interactive. When they have their own beliefs and their own gods, and they can be met, at the tavern table as well as the battlefield, it just adds a whole new dynamic. And, always one of my favorite gods has always been the Orc god Grumsh. And, for you old heads, you might remember the Legend and Lore book, and when they talk about, how the Orc race was actually formed, the gods drew lots to decide where their people their race would live. And when they got to the end, they got the Grumsh's turn to draw his lot. There was none left, so they all laughed at him and mocked him because there's no place for his people to go. Well, and then it goes through this whole series of him, striking the world with his spear, and turning lands into swamps and turning, forests into swamp, and turning the mountains into foothills, and just totally devastating everywhere. And at the end, his people would live everywhere and would be the bane of all the races for the end of their time. So, I always love that story. I'm not getting it verbatim, I'm sure. But,
go check out the old Legend and Lore book.
If you can find one. I'm sure you can get it online somewhere. Yeah. But, so the Orcs I've always had a fondness for them.
So, that's, that story is pretty cool. And using them in the campaign, if you've already got an established world, you could actually make a campaign out of the Orcs trying to get a civilization. Start off small and start showing, increased Orc activity, and you're winding up fighting them here, fighting them there. As your characters gain higher levels and investigate more, you realize that an army is coming. You negotiate with towns and cities in the area. You raise an army. You fight. It comes to a standstill. It's got to come to negotiations. You might come to the ability to fight duels against higher level Orcs and this and that. And in the end, you got to use diplomacy, and you say, all right, well, we'll give you this section or whatnot, and you not only get to use the Orcs throughout a whole campaign of sets, but you have the ability to then make a massive change on your campaign world directly through the player's actions.
What about the other end of that? What if you played as Orcs? You had a party of Orcs or monstrous humanoids of comparative strength, and you're on the other side of that, and they realize they can't actually win, but they don't want to give up what they've gotten, and there could be a lot of politicking on your side to keep to actually go to the table with diplomacy and you keep what you've already gotten. And you know, as the PCs, you have the threat of the civilized races trying to throw you back, and the threat of your own people, you know, not acting in their own best self-interest.
Because you're not using strength, you're using words.
Yes. You know, so maybe there's the political campaign going on behind the battle lines where you're trying to navigate and negotiate so that your people will stop fighting so that they can regroup, gain their strength, and build something lasting. Much like in the Many Arrows
Right.
Story. And much like we did in Grauner years before that story even came out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you owe us. Maybe not. His story is probably much cooler. But, you know, there's just so many different avenues you can go. It doesn't have to be just a dumb monster. And, you know, if you want to go with the savage primal orc, you can do that too, but it doesn't mean you have to do it in a way that's not interesting.
Indeed.
I mean, we played in an online game with Nerdarchus Nubs, and we actually, one of the encounters was us partying with an orc tribe, you know, at kind of like a funeral rites,
Right.
that we may or may not have been involved with. There's no evidence or proof of anything. But, so, you know, that's another example of how you can make that monster more interesting than just something to fight.
And of course, you've also got the bare bones. Anytime you have an intelligent monster, you've got something that has the ability to negotiate, that has the ability to role play. And, you know, if you just want to use it as a bruiser, give it some lines. Give it something to say, so it's not just a big dumb thing with an axe that's trying to cut your party in half.
Yeah, and not only that, too, the thing to keep in mind, too, is intelligent monsters don't fight to the death. Most things aren't willing to lay down their lives just because.
Right.
Not for treasure, you know, not for a home, maybe for their family.
Right.
But, you know, they're not just going to throw themselves on your sword. They may retreat. They may try to parlay. They may surrender. So these are the things to think about. And, you know, if they do surrender, then what do your PCs do?
Right.
What if there are non-combatants, women and children who are not fighting? What do they do with them? You know, do they set them free? Do they take them prisoner? Do they slaughter them like one of our paladins did in a very un-paladin-like manner?
He saw them as evil humanoids.
You know,
They had to be slayed.
they had to be slayed. So, you know, you guys can let us know what you do with orcs in your campaigns.
Is there anything you guys do that makes orcs, you know, special? Do you have, you know, some kind of template that you throw on them? Do you have something that your world has that orcs are something better? Do you change their stats and make them something that is different than the other orcs that are out there?
Or maybe you've completely kicked them out of your world like Dark Sun and Dragonlance. Who knows? But with that, you know, like, subscribe, comment, you know, check us out on the Facebook page.
You can check us out at justnerdarchy.com. We got lots of other content and stuff that's out there.
So until next time, my friends,
Stay nerdy.